Good evening from Europe to good morning to US. I'm Dario, the chairman of Next Pharma Summit, and welcome to our 9th session at this week's Next Innovation Week. This 9th session is having an extremely interesting and important topic, which is overcoming healthcare challenges with digital communications. And really pleased to welcome today 4 incredible pharma leaders. So first of all, we have Bagdi Youssef from Bayer. Hi Bagdi, how are you?
Hi, Dario.
Mark Johnson from GSK. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Very good, Dario.
Kushal Goli, whom we miss at the moment, but most probably he will join very soon. And Felix Jackson from MedCrowd. Hi, Felix. How are you?
Very good. Thanks very much, Dario.
So, gentlemen, at this stage, I would like to pass the moderation to my very good colleague, Paul from Pharma Forum. So Paul, the stage is yours, and really looking forward to this interesting conversation.
Thank you, Dario, and great to be asking the questions on this panel. I guess much easier to ask the questions than sometimes it is to answer them, so I've got a slightly easier job. And we did a panel earlier this week talking about the digitalization of reps and where that was going. We had a great discussion. Here we're sort of expanding that to look at communications in general, which, as we all know, has been significantly changed this year because of our little friend COVID-19. So we'll touch on some of those issues. I'm really interested to hear your different viewpoints around how digital communication is impacting your work. And I thought it might be quite a nice place to start is just to ask each of you to give a quick introduction to yourself and your role, and where you're coming at this topic from, so what your particular interest is around digital communication. As Dario said, we may be joined by Kushal shortly. I'm hoping he can join us. But in the meantime, each of you has a little bit more airtime, so make the most of it. So, Wagdi, let me come to you first. If you can just do a quick introduction and tell me a bit about your interest in this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. My name is Wagdi Youssef, and I am heading the medical communication, medical information, and publication and digital transformation in Bayer Medical Affairs US. And as a head of medical communication, I'm interested in the medical communication, especially the digital world we are living in. In my responsibility, we are responsible for providing all the healthcare community and patients with the new medical information, and also managing and being supportive to the health industry and to the healthcare in hospitals and in the private and also in the patient areas, that we need to communicate with them. We need to provide all the medical information, medical assistance for them, and it changed dramatically before and after COVID. So it's things are moving very fast pace, and I think that's it actually, as it's challenging, but it's also exciting to see how people are adapting to the new technologies in medical communication. So yeah, this is really something that I'm looking forward to see how the new world, or what we call new reality, will affect the medical communication.
That's great. And as you say, I mean, everyone's been talking of almost like nothing other than COVID the past year or so, but every other disease area, therapeutic area, that conversation has to keep going. So we'll come back to that. Felix, let me come to you next for your brief introduction.
Yeah, so I'm a medical director of MedDigital and MedCrowd. And so we think of ourselves as an organization that's overcoming healthcare challenges. That's quite a grand aim, but we really believe we do it. We work with organizations, the NHS, charities, life science companies, and we help them use digital communications and insightful science to overcome the challenges they face. We've got all sorts of different projects, from in Brazil in the Amazon jungle through to stuff back here in London. And it's a really exciting time. I mean, I fundamentally believed for a long time that digital was going to change the world of healthcare. And it's been doing that for a long time. There's many, many examples of that. But this year has really put it into stark focus. the reality is that digital healthcare, it works. Digital communications work, and people have been forced to adopt them this year, and they've gone, wow, that works. And so now they're continuing to do it. And so even when we go back, as hopefully as soon as possible, to a more normal world, I think the shift to digital will be permanent. And obviously there's going to be a shift back, because we all love meeting in person, spending time together at conferences, and patients need to be seen in person. But that shift won't be back to where we were. It'll be hopefully back to a better normal, where some things can carry on in this digital way and be delivered in a better way for patients and also for companies.
Yeah, completely agree. We'll all just have to remember how to behave in a real physical meeting as opposed to through a screen like this. Mark, let me come to you now for your introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and thank you for the opportunity of being part of the panel as well. So I work in global medical affairs in GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. I'm based in the UK. I've probably been in the industry over 25, it might be over 30 years, but 25 makes me sound younger, so I'll stick with that. So I've been in digital and sort of tech background, but always sort of had my roles and resided within the core business, and I think that's quite important actually now around digital. For me, I work in the space of digital engagement. I bring together the sort of marry up the digital sense and the behavior and the psychology, and I love the whole thing of it being new and embedding those sort of things. And I think that's core of being within the business, of actually making that difference, because it is something new. Pharma's notorious sort of slow to sort of bring these things to light. In terms of obviously COVID and the pandemic, for me, I've been banging on the drum around digital advisory boards. A lot of things on digital, but certainly digital advisory boards for a number of years now. And so it was, I suppose, a bit of an upside in a way. I mean, demand has been ridiculous, and we've seen some new challenges, which I'll go on to in a moment. But for me, it's been brilliant. I mean, for someone who loves digital, to see all of that and how we can start to utilize that as the new norm going forward, really.
Yeah. For anybody who's a digital advocate, it's definitely been a transformational year. And whether it's 10 years in 10 days or 2 years in 2 months, there's all kinds of going around. There's been a big acceleration. So we'll come back to the digital advisory board piece. I'm keen to hear a bit more about that. To begin with, though, let me come back to you, Felix, because I want to cast our gaze, beyond the industry. It's been an enormous challenge for healthcare systems. And for example, if you look at the NHS, how have you seen the NHS adapt to this very new environment?
It's a really great question. And what I'll do is I'll share my screen, which hopefully will come through in a second.
Yeah, I think we can see your desktop popping up now.
Brilliant. I'll make the video small then. I'll just close that module. Great. So I think it's been a really interesting year, because the NHS has had to adapt like everybody else in the UK. They've had to change the way they work, because patients haven't been able to come in and see the doctors into the routine care. And that's for 2 reasons. The first is that the routine care providers have been reassigned to deal with the pandemic situation. An example of that is a friend of mine who's a gastroenterology consultant ended up working on all the respiratory wards as a consultant on the respiratory wards, because of the number of respiratory patients that came in with COVID-19 and beyond. As in, it's not just he was seeing COVID-19 patients, he's helping with the routine care of other respiratory patients. And so he wasn't able to offer his routine gastroenterology services. And then the second part of it is that patients haven't been able to go in, either through lockdown or through shielding or through their own healthcare issues. They've not been able to go in and see the routine care providers. So the NHS has been forced to shift to digital methods. And in doing so, I happen to know the previous assistant director to diabetes of the NHS in Public Health England, and he gave me a call, and we've been chatting for a while about a project. And he just said he felt that it was the right time for us to move that project forwards. So 3 weeks later, we went live with the project, which is unprecedented for the NHS.
Pretty quick.
And yeah, really quick. I spent probably about 2 years talking to them about this project, and we'd failed to get anywhere. Well, not anywhere. We failed to make it live, I think is the point. And then within a couple of weeks, we suddenly went live with this really interesting project. And I'll come to that in a second. But one of the interesting challenges, and I'm talking about the NHS in a little bit more detail because I know that it's very interesting to the US attendees who don't have an NHS, is that we have this organisation called Public Health England, which commissions care. So basically, it pays for care. So it pays for hospitals, it pays for community services, it pays for all sorts of different things in order for patients in the UK to get the care they need, or Public Health England pays for England. But there's equivalent bodies in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. So they buy services basically for the populations. And sometimes they do that by giving the money to somebody else who then buys the services. And sometimes they buy services directly. But we actually set up a service basically directly funded by Public Health England. So they actually provided the service. And that provided caused a huge bunch of challenges. Because they aren't really set up to be a care provider. I mean, simple things like they can't approve something from an IT perspective. They can't give IT approval, like an NHS trust, a hospital can approve a service to have to store patient data and to process patient data, and they have systems and IT departments and risk assessments that they can go through to approve that technology for use in clinical care. And Public Health England doesn't have that. So they ended up having to work with other organisations to put that in place. But using the budgets that were assigned in pandemic situation, they were able to very quickly bring those people on board, which was very interesting. So I've got a couple of slides just to talk about the project in more detail. But I think it's really interesting to see how the situation has driven this project through. So basically we had the issue, which was specifically in diabetes, where Diabetes UK, which is a big UK charity supporting people with diabetes, was getting a very, very high volume of calls about clinical issues, patients with problems, and they didn't know where to go. There's simple things like patients with COVID-19, do they need to change their diabetic treatment, or do they need to go and see specialist services? Or people who couldn't access their routine care because it had been disrupted so much. And what Diabetes UK quickly realized is they need to be able to send those calls on to a clinical team because they don't give clinical advice. They're a charity that supports people with their life with diabetes, but they don't give clinical care. So there was this need for these clinical advisors to be available on the phone and answer these questions that were coming in. We focused obviously on type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and we set up this team very quickly. Using a kind of volunteer clinical advisors from around the country. And that was very interesting to see how this challenge came about from this charity. So what we did is we used MedCrowd, which is an instant messaging technology that we've developed, MedDigital has developed. And MedCrowd is very similar to WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or these other kind of messaging systems, but it works slightly differently. It enables you to have a conversation, so one conversation between a team and a person. So in this case, the NHS clinical advisors, or NHS diabetes advice as we call them, and then the patient or the caller who's phoning in. And what we did is we built the ability for the phone calls to come from Diabetes UK, go to a clinical advisor, and that would then open up MedCrowd and enable people to actually record that conversation on the phone, the actual recording, and also for the advisor to write notes into that MedCrowd conversation. And then that would invite the patient to join it afterwards. So you have this wonderful situation where you ended up with this conversation becoming the hub between the team of diabetes advisors and the caller or the patient. MedCrowd is approved for clinical notes, so we were able to store patient data. The NHS actually got another organisation to approve the IT, so we had to work with Guy's and Thomas's Hospital to approve the system, okay. And we very quickly went live with it, which was fantastic.
So this is probably an opportunity that wouldn't have been there without the COVID pandemic, or not there as quickly, I guess.
Well, yeah, and we've been talking about this idea for a couple of years, but as you say, the point is that it suddenly became really necessary with these, patients, people with diabetes not being able to get their routine care because it was disrupted. And we were able to put this system in place very, very quickly, which was fantastic. and get that advice for these people who are phoning up Diabetes UK.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's cool. And we found a number of different things. So it was very easy for people to use and to be able to access both the phone system and also the messaging conversations. And routing across both meant that the advisors could share things like PDFs or links to guidance and advice online. So the callers were able to get information beyond just speaking on the phone. They could come back in and listen to their advice again, which was really helpful for them as well. And all of that was recorded for a kind of auditable, so we could check on the advice and check in, and if there's issues, we could pick up with advisors and retrain people. So we ended up with a very auditable and manageable caseload, basically. And then, of course, it was all done within the data protection requirements, both from a kind of European GDPR, but also clinical notes and requirement to protect patient data. And just to share some testimonials, so we had some really great feedback. The first part is from a diabetes patient who said they got really good advice, they found it very easy to use, and they found it was an excellent service. And then the customer care manager at Diabetes UK said that it really supported their work in enabling them to support people living with diabetes to get the advice and guidance they needed. And they found that it really helped people in this very uncertain time to get the advice they need, and during a time when diabetes was in the news a lot because it was a comorbidity associated with a bad outcome in COVID-19. So there's a lot of very scared and uncertain people out there.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Very good. So one example of digital adaptation to this new environment. So Mark, I'm going to come to you in a second and ask you to build on this point about digital advisory boards. Before I do that, I want to welcome Kushal to our panel. And Kushal, would you like to just give a quick introduction, as I did with the other panelists, to yourself, your role, and sort of what your interest is in this topic?
Definitely, and apologies, I got my calendar mixed up, so I had 11 o'clock for this panel.
No problem.
Thank you, Paul. So I lead corporate strategy and innovation at Parexel, and my role is really to bridge, new innovations to how we run clinical trials at Parexel. I'm based out of Boston, a recent MIT executive MBA grad, and have been in the industry for the last 12-13 years. So really looking forward to the panel. And Felix, I did catch most of your panel as well.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to come back to talking about clinical trials and the impact there. So I'm glad you managed to join us. Before we get there, Mark, let me come to you, because we saw Felix's presentation there about that interaction between patients and clinicians, but also broadening that out to advisory boards and maintaining that kind of interaction. Everything's been thrown up in the air this year. So what have you seen as the impact there? How have you seen things change?
Yeah, thank you, Paul, and great stuff there, Felix. So as I said, we've sort of been banging on the drum for digital advisory boards for a number of years. We've been doing them for quite a while, and they're fantastic. But I think what has surprised me in terms of challenges first, if I may, that sort of came up on the back of the pandemic and the increased demand, was the expectation of what digital advisory boards were. So just maybe of help to others out there, and also just encourage people to post any questions for later. But first off was just the understanding and positioning of digital advisory boards. And I think there was a lot of confusion over what they were or how to use them. And secondly was sort of the benefits of those, and then the governance. So I'm just going to quickly talk about those two areas first. The positioning of them, what was really interesting is how a lot of people, because they were being forced into this position on the back of the pandemic, they were sort of seen as digital as a replacement to face-to-face. And I think that's how a lot of people tend to go in. And if you do go at it in that mindset, the worry for me is that you're not really looking to use the right benefits of what the digital channel can bring to the advisory board. And so quite often, if there was an advisory board that was set for half a day or a day, they were looking to run a digital meeting for sort of 6 hours, and all of those different things. And that's the wrong sort of positioning. The benefits that we see of connecting for a digital advisory board is you can do it, and there's benefits for both the company and also the participant. I think they've been accelerated because obviously nobody's really traveling at the moment. So, but a digital advisory board allows them to do it in their own time. So in essence, okay, you're not traveling. You could argue you're saving some cost. We're all saving some carbon footprint in that position as well. But there's the case of doing it in your own time and being able to engage. So what's shifted is, rather than a traditional advisory board being done in one day, digital advisory boards tend to happen over a period of time. And I think in that enables people to reflect much more on the content and the data and the discussion, and we tend to see much more informed responses. So it's a different way of engaging. And I'm not, again, you know, I don't see it as a replacement. I just see it as an addition to traditional advisory boards. The face-to-face is such a great way, because you have to build that level of trust to get the right level of engagement. And yes, you can do it on a virtual environment, but it is a lot when you're face-to-face. That's really where you get sort of powerful levels of engagement and trust.
Yeah.
So the other challenge, just to sort of mention, is the governance aspect. So as this sort of engagement has shifted from a day to then over time, the governance and you know, in medical affairs, engaging externally and these sort of advice is a staple part of our business. But you're paying external experts. With that, the risk obviously goes up. And as soon as you start to then engage over time, that doubles up the level of risk. And I think I would just encourage the open, constant communication internally with all the stakeholders, as well as sort of with your participants in that sense, because you've got to be able to make sure it's legitimate need. We're not exposing ourselves to paying them for unnecessary advice and things like that. So it's how we're all starting. It's great that we've got increased demand. It's absolutely brilliant, but we're having to put new frameworks and new ways of working. So that's certainly, I think, testing and some of the challenges we're seeing internally. The other thing is, you know, yes, digital advisory boards allows for experts and participants to do it in their own time. But I think we've also got to be appreciative that the pandemic has put so much pressure on many of these HCPs, not just with respiratory, but all over. And so with all pharmacos suddenly wanting to run to virtual environments to connect, there's only so much time that they've got in the day. So there is an aspect of, I think, the sort of more ongoing digital advisory boards where they can connect in for 10 minutes or 20 minutes and have that discussion is a great way, rather than taking too much of their time. So that's a few bits there of sort of talking about some of the sort of challenges and benefits and behaviors. But we've done a lot of digital advisory boards. We're getting great response, and for me, actually increasing the opportunity for the business to get insights, not more insights, but actually quicker and more ongoing for the business to help shape the strategy and what we do going forward. So it's just a win-win all round for me.
Yeah, and I think a clear message that, and I see this a lot with digital engagement in different forms, you know, just trying to do what we've done physically and translate it to digital doesn't necessarily work. And as you've described, there are opportunities to do things perhaps better than we've done in that physical engagement environment. Wagner, let me come to you on this point before I move on to clinical trials. I'd quite like to get your reflections on that. I'm guessing you're trying to maintain advisory boards and this sort of interaction as well. How's it worked out for you?
I was planning to ask Mark also for something about advisory boards. I think it's the digital advisory boards even started before COVID-19, as Mark has discussed. But we find somehow difficulties in keep the advisors engaged. I mean, it's one of the things that is difficult is how to make sure that the advisor digitally or like camera or like engaged in the discussion and not really get detached or like not really involved. Do you have any Mark, from your experience, any advices, any tips or any just to keep the advisors engaged in the digital discussions, because this is something that we also experience difficulties in it, especially when you are talking about thought leaders who are not really a tech savvy person. So you maybe lose like at the beginning of like 15 minutes trying to put everyone and where are you, can you see my screen, and can you hear my voice, and so can you give us some tips on, like, from your experience with digital advisory boards, how you manage these situations?
Yeah, no, happy to. And I think there's a couple of things. One is the digital sense can be asynchronous and synchronous. So there's different types. You can do the sort of virtual meeting like we're doing now, but then there's the online discussion over time. And I think there's a sort of role that becomes more important in the digital sense than it was in the traditional. So the traditional face-to-face, you've got the chair, you've got the moderators, etc. But then there becomes this facilitator. And the facilitation in digital is critical because that's the person who sort of keeps the engagement and the discussion going. You can't always rely on the technology or the tools to help people engage. So that's the facilitator becomes critical throughout the session, but it's also how you set them up. So often, you know, we come straight into a virtual meeting or digital advisory board. It's how you build that level of trust that people can feel like they can engage and share and open up.
Yeah.
So often a question that is, you know, what do you have for breakfast, or what's your favorite car, or anything that may be, we call them icebreakers and stuff like that. But they're a way of sort of opening up that engagement and suddenly seeing the individuals for people. We're all, you know, they're experts, they're there for a reason. That tends to then layer that sort of level of relationship and opening up and sharing. And then it's that important part of the facilitator to keep that discussion of going, you know, Felix, that was a great conversation. Paul, what did you think about that? And sort of keeping that going. That becomes a critical part that's not always in the traditional face-to-face.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think again it reinforces another point I see consistently across digital engagement, which is technology is part of it, but the human skills, the ability to interact digitally, which is not always the same as face-to-face, becomes a really critical factor. We'll probably come back to that in a moment. But Kushal, let me come back to you, because we've spoken about kind of, you know, advisory boards gathering information. I'd like to take a look at the clinical trials side of this, because COVID, as you know, has massively disrupted lots and lots of trials, and there's still a big impact even as we hopefully come out of this downstream because of that. So what adaptation have you seen there from a digital perspective?
Share a couple of slides here, right? So I think, as you rightly mentioned, with COVID-19, can you see my screen okay?
We can, yeah, we can see the first slide.
Okay, somehow. Yeah, so I think what happened with decentralized trials is we were, of course, targeting to, you know, really scale this up over the last 24 months. And with decentralized trial, the main aim is to really take the clinical trials to the patients, right, and not wait for them to come to the bigger hospital settings. So this framework, I think, provides a high-level overview. Like pre-COVID, of course, we were having these innovation discussions with all of our partner companies, but the discussions were a bit sporadic. And as all of you can attest, like, you know, in theory, the concept really sounds good, but when it comes to kind of putting some of these innovations on your own trial, people really are not comfortable, right? Because the trial, the product is really their baby, and they don't want to kind of mess with the program. But when COVID-19 hit, as you can imagine, 60–70% of the sites were not reachable in the industry, right? Like, you could not run clinical trials the way you did, because you could not get to the patients, you could not get to the sites, you could not do your SIVs. So I think when in March and April timeframe, the entire focus for our company really moved over to trial continuity. And I think the digital assets, the digitization played a very key role in terms of how do we continue to monitor these studies in areas like oncology, pediatric asthma. Like these are like not just science experiments, there are people and patients on the other side. I think Parexel was lucky enough, like we have our own logistics business, so we were able to, get the drugs, but also get a lot of the PPE support to our site networks to maintain the trial design. But then ultimately, all these studies do need to be kind of submitted back to the FDA. So you do need to you can't just change things without the right paperwork. So I think there was a lot of focus on trial continuity. I think what we are focused on now, and although it says post-COVID, we can debate whether it's the second wave or the third wave. But the idea is, yeah, now we are trying to see how can we really learn from these urgent pivots and make them part of the new normal. So the one that I'll just there are a lot of things where digital assets play a key role, especially around remote monitoring and decentralized trials. But I'll just highlight the decentralized trial like over the next couple of minutes, right? And a lot of you might be well aware of what decentralized trials means. I think initially when we pioneered one of our first decentralized trials back in 2009 with Pfizer, we had tried like an out of a box, fully decentralized trial approach. And although the trial didn't go quite well, of course, we learned quite a bit from that first trial. And now we have I think over 100 decentralized trials that we have conducted just at Parexel, and the industry of course has really evolved as well. But most of the trials are like hybrid in nature, so we still strongly believe like the principal investigator plays a key role in really driving a clinical trial. So any low touch procedure can be done at home, and then you can get all the insights from the principal investigator where you need care. So one such trial that I can share with the group and on the panel and on the seminar today is we had a pediatric asthma trial running in 17 countries when the pandemic hit, right? And we still had to randomize around 300 patients in these 17 countries. And I think because we had invested in the decentralized trial infrastructure, we could quickly pivot and use our technology partners platform to use for decentralized monitoring. We, of course, use home nursing on these trials. So some of the low touch procedures can be done at home through qualified registered nurses. And then, as I mentioned, because of the logistics capability, we were able to share, send the drugs directly to these people home. And it's truly commendable. Like I think the current, I guess, if you compare the plan versus the actual, the trial is still outperforming the original plan that was shared with the innovator. So I think, that of course there's a lot of bad things related to COVID, but I strongly believe that the pandemic has really helped accelerate some of these innovations. So people, if they were iffy about whether or not they would run a clinical trial in a decentralized form, are much more open to the discussion, and the industry has really gained leaps and bounds on this area over the last couple of months.
And just a brief follow-up question on that. So are you optimistic that once we've come through COVID and hopefully we get the vaccines out next year and it's kind of gone away, are you optimistic some of this change will remain?
Yeah, I think, Paul, that's a very interesting question. Like I'll share a data point. Like pre-COVID, I think the industry only did 10 to 15% of remote monitoring. When COVID came, of course, it shot up to like 50, 60%. But I think because it's much more efficient, it reduces the burden on the patient. If you talk about decentralized, we will never go back to the way it was. Like, it will be an improvement. So I'm hoping on remote monitoring, this number would come back to at least 30% even after the pandemic. And DCT, I guess I'm bullish because each and every opportunity that's going out of like our shop right now has some component of DCT on it. So I don't think clinical trials will ever go back to the way they were because of these adoptions.
Yeah, interesting. And with a process that, as you say, has been done a certain way for so long, it takes something quite big like COVID-19 to really disrupt it. Thank you, Kushal. Thank you for sharing. So let me come back to you, Wagdi, at this point, because I'm really interested to know, as we start to look ahead, and we touched on it there, where are things going to go and where are things going to go post-COVID? Some people call it the new normal. I noticed Dario's using next normal. I think that's quite clever branding maybe on his part. But in this new post-COVID environment, where do you think things are heading, Wagdi, and what new forms of digital engagement are we going to see?
Thank you, Paul. Can you see my screen?
We can, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So that's actually something. Sorry, you still see it?
We do, or I do at least.
Good. So it was a full. It is a year full of. Do you see my screen, right? So it's,
and you're on mute with the other comment of the year.
Exactly right. So yeah, we saw that there even in Bayer before COVID-19, we were also thinking about the digital reshaping of the healthcare system, and we had the vision, and also we saw that from some reports. This paper published August 2015 from McKinsey Group, but actually it is not. That was obviously before COVID-19. And before COVID-19, the main area that the old pharma industry and digital should be looking at is the outcome-based care moving to the center of stage. So now we are talking about the data generation and observation studies and health economic studies. So it's more into numbers and more into outcome-based communication. And again, in US, I worked globally, in a lot of different countries. But what I feel also most important is the patients. The patients are becoming more engaged, and patients have a voice. And I have experienced this in US much more. So the patients now, they can go and Google what the symptoms they have, and they come back. Sometimes it's challenging the treating physicians in some decisions. So the patients are empowered, and you need to work with that. Also, new competitors in the market moving on. So now you have Google, you have Amazon, you have tech companies. You never thought like this are going to come into the healthcare industry. And I just read recently that Amazon, they have this prescription refill prescription through Amazon Alexa, which is another something that people can just do the refill through digital platform, which is Amazon Alexa. Yeah. Even internal in any company, we need to move more digitally. All of this related to the processes, related to the governance, related to the SOPs. So things need to be more digitally. And finally, there are more information available, product performance. So as I said, anyone can go to any website and start. There is a lot of data about the product's performance. So these are the trends which actually reshaping healthcare even before COVID-19. We had a problem in even before COVID-19, looking at the quality and the impact of the medical affairs tools used by the healthcare professionals. If you imagine any doctor or any MD in his practice with after COVID-19, they have a very high flow of patients. They have very limited hours of seeing the patients, and they have to be working in a very restricted space and time. So there is a lot of constraints, and these constraints has to be overcome by digital solutions. So in the past, if you go to a doctor and then you start talking about symptoms and they wanted to know something, they have the time to call the contact center of the company, to dial, to Google, to use their computer and look over websites and see the latest publications. But this luxury of time is not available these days after COVID-19. So this survey has been done by McKinsey, also published post COVID-19, actually during COVID-19. And when you look at the impact of digital medical affairs tools, the doctors, the percentage of physicians indicating very strong or extremely strong impact from the company's tools, you will find a very good percent of like it's when you look at the quality, not let's look at the quality first. When you look at the quality of medical affairs tool, you'll find a very good percent of healthcare professionals and physicians related to the quality, like 65% like the digital virtual tools, 72% likes interact with MSLs digitally, 72 digital medical information access, so email interaction 67, even I think there was also virtual congresses 70%, and including peer-to-peer and to mark points advisory board. So they are seeing a good quality of digital services. But when you look at the impact of these services to the medical affair, from the medical affairs to the physicians related to their decision making and the impact, it's a very low percentage. So that means that there is a good quality of services, but they are not enough to impact the healthcare professional decision. So there is a room of improvement, and one of the things that we thought about in Bayer from the medical communication and medical information, how to improve the access to the medical information during this post-COVID area. And we believe that there are certain things that need to be addressed, very important. First thing, access 24/7. So doctors now, they will not contact the call center, and it's working hours, the 8 hours per day, and they cannot get the information from the contact center. Second thing, fast. So they don't want to wait on the lines. They don't want to submit a request and wait for the company to come back and send. They don't want to send to ask for an MSL visit and then the MSL contact them. They want the information right now. So we created a digital chatbot, and which is based on the natural language processing for healthcare professionals in US, where they can just immediately go to the chatbot, select which product you want to ask question. You ask the question, and based on the natural language processing, the system understands what the doctor is asking about, and they answer them on label and off label because they are HCP, and they can be answered off label, and provide them with the documents to support their decision. And I believe that we decided about this medical information services before even COVID-19. But again, the timeline was too long. But once the COVID hits, the timelines became tomorrow. We need this. So yes. It went. I think it's a very important, and I don't see we are going back at any moment to the traditional way. The challenge that doctors sometimes, plus the time, plus the interaction, but also the technology understanding. we have thought leaders, we have who are not really tech savvy people, so they don't know what to do immediately to get the answer. But with what's happening after COVID-19 forced them to learn how to use this stuff. And once they learn that, there is no way back. You will continue doing that.
It's a really interesting example, that chatbot, because it's kind of, for me, reflective of, people talk about this a lot, and I think it's true. You know, people expect, physicians, for example, expect the same experience as they get with Amazon in their personal lives. That kind of very rapid information, one click, that's what they're looking for in their professional lives. And you know as well as I do, right, doing these things is not easy. You've got to work through the compliance processes, it takes time. And it's almost like COVID-19, because a lot of stuff can't happen, has created some time for some of that innovation. I'm not saying anybody here is sat on their hands waiting for things to do, but it creates a space to do some of that stuff. Let me take it back around the panel at this stage, because we've started to look ahead about where things are going. I'm really interested to get your perspectives on, over the next 2 to 4 years, as we hope come out of COVID and start to emerge into this new normal, next normal, whatever the phrase is, what you think some of the biggest lasting changes are. And Felix, let me come back to you on this, because you've been sat very patiently since presenting at the start. Where do you think we're heading with this? What's going to be the biggest lasting change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think lots of lasting changes. I think the main thing is people have become comfortable with digital. They often didn't want to do it because they'd never really tried it and never really got over that kind of barrier of getting to grips with it. Because it's not intuitive necessarily. I mean, it's quite easy to use, but it takes a bit of time getting used to. And so for my clinical colleagues, I've noticed that GPs are now comfortable doing online meetings, because they used to make a few phone calls and see people in clinic, but now they've added in another thing, which is these virtual clinical calls, virtual clinics. And they're now comfortable with that because they've had to do it. They've got used to it, and they're beginning to learn this works for a virtual clinic, this doesn't, and they're beginning to triage patients appropriately because they've just got the hang of it. And for businesses, it's the comfort moving away from that face-to-face interaction. Life science companies have been very dependent on personal interactions for a very long time, which is great because they're very good. But also, they now realize that digital interactions do work. And I mean, coming to Mark's point about digital advisory boards, we use MedCrowd to do them. And MedCrowd is a technology that uses instant messaging as a simple interface, basically. And the doctors are giving really good answers because they're used to using it, because they're used to WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger and things, and they're able to give some consideration and ponder their answer for a while. So therefore, they can come back with a really high quality answer. They can't do that in face-to-face environment because they have to sit and give their immediate answer. They can't go and look it up for an hour before coming back. And so you're seeing this kind of shift to digital, which is actually improving the way that companies are getting insight. And you can imagine GPs using the clinical tools to stay in touch with their patients more, or see patients they couldn't see normally, or see people in their home environment, which is adding information to the mix, which they normally didn't have. So actually, I think people have moved from I'm uncomfortable with this to I'm now comfortable with it. And I'm now beginning to realize that there's some places where it's beneficial that actually adds information that I didn't have from the real world. And it's those areas that I think will stay strong, and some other areas will drift back where that face-to-face interaction is more important and just often nicer to have.
Yeah, I think probably end up in this kind of hybrid environment, won't we? Kushal, let me come back to you, because we touched on before where you thought clinical trials were going, and I don't know if you can kind of hone it down to maybe in 3 or 4 years' time, what will be so different about a clinical trial, or indeed any other observations on broader digital where you think things are heading?
I think, Paul, I would maybe call out two. One is, of course, I think the decentralized trial adoption will continue, and I think it's also a very kind of it's an equalizer, right? It will help bring in more diverse patients into clinical trials who don't have access to healthcare. So I think it's important that we continue. And then I guess the second one is both an opportunity and challenge is, how does the real world data from EMRs, EHRs kind of interact with the clinical trial data, because currently these two do sit in separate silos and people are trying to bridge the gap. You can look at Vulcan, the HL7 initiative that's focused on this, but there's a lot of work that remains to be done on this end.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, I'm going to come back to you on this one as you look over that kind of 2 to 4 year timescale and think about what you will be doing. Where do you see the biggest change?
Well, other than being busy.
Other than being busy, I think we're all going to be busy, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fantastic. I think for me, I completely agree with my fellow panelists in that sense. And I think it's great the data that Wagdi has presented there in that there is an opportunity. And I think there's a key part there is the measurement, because digital does give us this opportunities to measure more. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. Yeah. So it's quite interesting how that changes behavior. And I agree, the whole confidence piece, the digital, we've also got this environment thing. So even when, we do say that we're going to, come out at the back of the pandemic, are people going to want to travel as much because of the impact of the environment? And I think that's going to come back a little bit as another driver. But I think there, in terms of where I see the massive changes happening, is probably where digital is going to sit within the businesses. Is it going to be that support function, or is it going to really start to be integrated more into the business, into the ways of working, and how you drive that forward? And also, I think it came up on one of the sessions earlier in the week on this conference, was the sort of a bit of a shift maybe from where a lot of the activity for medical affairs with our external customers is via the MSLs, and maybe shifting a bit more to all of these digital tools of the company. But I think as Wagdi has sort of, and the data here, those MSLs, their role may shift. They're all having to do this digital engagement in a way, and how that, I think Pharma Co has been very focused on the customer relationship management. I think there's now a shift to the customer experience management, how we try and tie all of these different engagements together. So I think that, all of this has been accelerated. And I think the last thing for me, I just think it's brilliant, the behavior, how we've all become, we're so much more tolerant and acceptable of problems on digital now, because we experience them every day. And we've all been, given insight into everybody's home life, and we're, no one worried about what the background was like before pandemic, and now we've got this new sort of change as we're going forward. So it's all exciting.
Well, to that point, it's a minor miracle that we've not had a child or a pet or something come into the shot on one of our cameras so far. But I love your point about digital being across the business, because it's something I've believed in for many years. Is should you really have a specialist department, because actually it's part of everybody's role now, and I think we've seen that really accelerated. Wagdi, let me come back to you just to build on that. Next 2 to 4 years, particularly from the medical side where you are, what do you think are the biggest changes we're going to see come through?
Yeah, I think for the changes already started. So we are changing already. I think now we have in every pharma industry a digital function, either in sitting in a commercial or sitting in medical affairs, but it's already started and established. We learn new things. We learn natural language processing, we learn AI, we learn about even we update all our processes related to the safety reporting, related to the governance, the data privacy. So we are actually in the process of changing. What I wish, not also I'm seeing, but what I wish to see after 4 or 5 years from now is how all the digital initiatives are overlapped or interact. So if there is a patient who is actually chatting with a chatbot, how can they get into access to a clinical trial, like from recruit themselves in the clinical trial, or find out where to go? How this will be linked to these digital solutions from insurance companies, how this will be linked to the digital solutions from the data generation groups. So these all initiatives are currently, everyone is running in their own way. But for 4 years, if all of these get overlapped, it will be a full digital experience, started from maybe someone who is actually measuring their temperature by a temperature device. That could be linked, a lot of wearable devices, how this all linked together to give the full experience for the patients and for the HCPs to be able to impact their life in a smooth way and make them like get some more time to do what they love to do. I mean, they can this whole digital experience, I'm envisioning it by 4 or 5 years, if not even earlier, they will be linked together somehow to get this full experience for patients or for healthcare professionals.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the patient there, and we've got a few minutes left on this panel. It seems like a good place to sort of end is by talking about the patient. So maybe if I can just come to each of you, quick 30 seconds or a minute response on, again, as we look forward, what do you see as the biggest benefit for patients from this digitalization of healthcare? Felix, let me come back to you first on that.
I think the access to information improved when the internet arrived. And the digital shift now is access to advice and expert kind of opinion, accessing doctors and other healthcare professionals. And that is now going to be improved, whether that's through virtual clinics or through text messaging or whatever. They're going to be able to access people more, healthcare professionals more directly as well. So it's like the advice on the information is now accessible digitally as well.
Great, thank you. Kushal, let me come to you next.
Well, I think you jinxed the disruption because I have landscapers right outside my window, so apologies. But I think in clinical trials, digitalization overall gives a patient a voice in shaping the clinical trials, and this was not possible before. So I feel they will have a bigger voice in how clinical trials are designed and executed, and it's all thanks to digitization.
Thank you. Wagdi, let me come back to you on that.
I think that's for me or Mark.
Yeah, for you, Wagdi, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think the for patients, I think also plus what Kushal and Felix said, I think it's a prediction also for disease and prediction for complication. It's something that will be for the future, diabetes complication, hypertension complication. All of this could be digitally discovered by wearables, by self-monitoring. And this would be a very good preventive for the patients in the future.
Thank you. And Mark, I'm going to give you the final word on this.
Very kind, thank you. I certainly, the whole acceleration has got to be good for patients, that pharmacos are talking more actively and ongoing with healthcare professionals, and hopefully we can hear more back and advance the science of medication, and for patients to get more involved with healthcare in that sense. But I do wonder if the other big benefit will be access. So I do see patients the same way that all of our healthcare professionals love to be in that network with colleagues and exchange ideas. This could advance the opportunity for patients to be more connected to each other, and then how we help that advance the thinking as well.
Yeah, that seems like a good point to end things. And we all know that 2020 has been a very interesting year for a number of reasons, and very challenging. No one is dismissing that, but I think it seems an optimistic tone to say that actually where we are now and how it's accelerated digital, ultimately there's some real benefit that comes out of this. So let me close things just by saying thank you to each of you, Wagdi, Mark, Felix and Kushal. Thank you so much for joining me. I know everyone's diaries are busy. We've covered so much ground. It's been a great discussion. Thank you to all of you who've been viewing the session. And of course, thank you to Dario and Next Innovation Week for the invite. Thank you very much and see you next time.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you.
Pleasure to be here. Bye-bye.